Welcome, everyone, to the Mapped Out Podcast. I am your host, Michael Patterson, along with my co-host, Michael Szymanski. Let's get this episode 11 started. Okay, for our 11th episode, Michael, what are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to be chatting about overtraining.
Okay, so the subject of overtraining. Now, before we begin, we got to ask for a favor. If you like the show, please share it with like-minded individuals, your friends, your family, your dog. We don't mind. So let's dive into overtraining. So, Michael, actually, I have to ask you the age-old question. How are you doing today? I didn't forget. My mic's all messed up.
I feel good.
Okay. Thank you for that detailed analysis.
Of course.
How's the training been?
It's good. Yeah. I don't know. It's just I've been doing bodybuilding now, so
Okay.
It's just very high volume. Today I did a leg workout, so just a lot of reps, a lot of sets of 20. So it's just fun.
And
fun
so
time.
along that volume topic, see, like you like this segue? Let's dive into overtraining and our thoughts on it. So I want to hear just original. When you hear overtraining, what do you think of when I first say that?
Nervous system fatigue, leading to inability to produce maximum amount of force or learn motor activities well.
Okay.
Or just someone who's really tired and can't lift because they're too sore and they can't recover.
And I think the experience of bodybuilding, of powerlifting, or really of any athlete, as you kind of grow in your experience, you start to have a new interpretation of what overtraining really is. Because when you're just starting out, I think a lot of people associate it with just soreness, right? And I loved how you brought in the nervous system, because that's really the core of where you look at overtraining, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I like to say, like the nervous system's fried if you're overtrained, and this is because all muscle activity originates with electrical signals impulsed through the nervous system, and basically you can think of it as like short circuiting the circuit when
Okay.
you overuse the circuit. Basically, when you're training too much volume, or you're having too much neural fatigue, so you're contracting your muscles at a very high power output, 1 reps maxes and like stuff like that too often causes that fatigue.
And then that in turn, you end up with the soreness, the lack of performance, so to say, and that as you get more experienced, you're able to recognize that much more. Can we talk? I know we were talking about the nervous system. So, what is the difference between correct training and overtraining, in a sense of how do we analyze that from a nervous system level?
So I usually like to present it within the parameters of the science of overload training. So that's just the basic principle that every system has a limit in its current capacity, and in order to overcompensate and then learn how to compensate for more higher thresholds of activity, you need to stress that system so that it learns how to handle that stress. And overtraining basically occurs when you overstress the system. It doesn't learn how to effectively commit the activity because it's fried, pretty much.
Yeah.
You burst the bubble versus stretch it, and then it inflates a little bit larger. You just pop it right away.
Yeah, so rather than that continuous healing process of getting stronger and stronger and stronger, you end up with just a balloon.
And we see you see a baseline performance metric, and then you see a decrease in performance when we introduce a new cycle of training. But then at the end of the cycle of training, if you did it well with progressive overload, which is usually a term that we use, then you see a new baseline established for performance. And then that's how you overload the system. So yeah,
And there's that comes down to effective programming, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
as like you mentioned, if it's structured into your programming correctly, you'll end up with increased performance. Your body will get slowly stronger over time. You'll constantly push that new level, but you aren't going to be burning yourself out. Um, what are some critiques, if you want to say, when looking at overtraining and when it comes to programming?
hmm I think the obvious one would be matching volume and intensity, because those have to be more or less inversely proportional within a program. So if you're bringing up volume by a large degree, you have to drop the intensity by somewhat of a factor. But then if you want to increase intensity solely, so like powerlifting, then you have to drop the volume because you're contracting at such high levels of force that it just taxes your system, and you can't have repeated efforts like that throughout the entire week and cycle, because you need to deload your system in order for it to adapt correctly.
And I also think that it's overtraining when we say that. It's it's widely considered to be much more endurance based like philosophy, right? That you're just burning out because you're running so many miles or you're doing so many pull-ups or you're doing XYZ. It can also happen in powerlifting too. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Okay.
and we usually see it when it's too late sometimes, and that's because you peak someone wrong, and then like they're actually strongest a week before the meet, and then their nervous system is at its capacity. It's close to its absolute strength. And then the next week at the meet, you see the people failing some lifts that you planned out. And that's because their nervous system is at a point where it needs to be rested for a long period
Yeah.
of time. So usually we see that. But also, I mean, if you're seeing, your plan with powerlifting, we plan out like lifts per week. So like increasing poundage, just progressive overload,
Mhm.
and we'll see like, you can push up the weight, but the performance aspect is decreased. So you can't do as many reps, or you can't withhold, a 3x5 of, like 3 sets at this weight. You can only do like 2 or 1. And then you can continue to lift the weight. So, but the actual volume aspect of it, it's just hard to overcome when you're fatigued that much.
And along with my powerlifting program, what I've at least noticed from my own experience has been if I sit down before I go in 8-week intervals, right? And if I sit down and I plan out for the next 8 weeks, what I'm going to do, I'm much more focused on that particular weight at that particular set range when I'm dedicated to, and I have that written down, and I'm dedicated to that number. What I often found was that if I didn't have it written down or I didn't plan ahead, I'll say, "Oh, I feel pretty good today," and then I'll start bumping up some weight here, or maybe I take some weight off because I'm sore or something, and you end up with incorrect amounts of training in order to maximize your performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it all piles onto each other, obviously.
Completely.
But you always, with some push here, you can always integrate auto regulation within your training. So that just means you have to develop. This is obviously for advanced people, but you have to develop a sense of what you feel like coming into a certain training session. And then you have to auto regulate, meaning you have to, either increase by 5 pounds, take off 10 pounds. Basically saying like, how do you feel during
Mhm.
the session, and then auto regulating within the session, and that helps too, especially regulating the end portion of your training, like the volume or like the accessory movements that aren't really necessary every single training session, but can be. If at autumn, like the entire training block, they're necessary, but like if you don't feel like on one day, and then like it's an accessory movement, it's not like a primary movement, so you don't have to worry about it.
Well, and those are kind of the silent killers too, because when it comes to those accessory muscles, I notice particularly like in the back muscles, because your back is active in almost every single movement, at least for stabilization. When you continuously train certain muscle groups and maybe they get fatigued, that will hurt you on the bigger lifts or the more compound movements, right?
Yeah, that's why we have to have targeted fatigue at moments within the training. So we're not pumping 5 sets of 20 on tricep extensions, focusing on the lockout at a peak week, because that should be already proficient. We
Yep.
do that in the beginning when we're accumulating volume, but the intensity is lower.
And I know we're talking a lot about in the gym. I think it can also transition towards endurance athletes such as running, and the same philosophy applies, really. Look at your training schedules, understand, okay, I'm slowly making improvements, but I'm not drastically increasing or overloading on my ranges that I need to be at, and then stick with it, and that you should be good. Am I correct?
Yeah, and just keep track of stuff. Keep track of your nutrition, your sleep, water intake, the training from the past week, so you can plan ahead. And then I know we're throwing around fatigue a lot, and I just want to put a cork in one particular situation.
Let's hear it, Michael.
And that's adrenal fatigue. It's commonly thrown around nowadays. I think I have adrenal fatigue. I just can never recover. Like, I just have adrenal fatigue. Like, I gotta cut out coffee. I have adrenal fatigue.
Okay.
And basically, just give a quick science.
Can we hang on before we dive into the science real quick? Can we get a 30-foot overview of what adrenal fatigue, like in layman's terms?
Yeah. So basically, you have the adrenals that sit on top of your kidneys, and these pump out epinephrine into your bloodstream.
Okay.
And this is just a stress hormone that can do things that are similar to cortisol, but more on an instantaneous hormonal level as it's released in the blood. And people say like they have too much adrenaline in their system all the time, so they have adrenal fatigue now. So they're just always tired. And basically, in a short sentence, your adrenals can last you 2 lifetimes. So the whole thing of adrenal fatigue is kind of just not supported in any evidence, and it probably comes down to lack of sleep, under eating, and not eating enough of nutrients that are required for recovery.
And if you need more information on those topics, please refer back to previous episodes. We've covered a lot of those, but it just shows the importance of. Obviously, there's a big core part of your training needs to be focused on lifting weights, movements, but also on the recovery side and making sure that you're upkeeping with your nutrients, you're upkeeping with your sleep. Sleep's a huge one, especially for repairing muscle tissue, repairing your body in general.
Yeah, and you grow outside of the gym. You don't grow within the gym.
Yeah, the gym's actually for tearing.
Yeah.
And deconstruction.
Yeah. And it's psychologically it's understandable, because you see yourself in the mirror after a workout and you're bigger. So, on a subconscious level, you may think that, you just grew.
Get a little pump in.
So, I mean, it makes sense, but, you just have to always keep yourself in perspective of what's actually happening.
Completely.
Yeah. And then we can talk about are you actually fatigued, or are you lazy?
Oh, please explain further.
So when we're talking about overtraining,
wait. There's people that don't want to wake up and just go to the gym 24/7.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Oh, it's tragic. No. But another thing we have to realize is that alongside disease states, psychological states play very large roles in determining how you look at what's happening to your body. For instance, like when you have a cold, there's lots of data on how your actual mental state and observance of what that disease is doing to you actually affects how you feel. And it goes the same thing for overtraining, I believe. And people may be too lazy because they're sore, especially beginners, and they're sore, and they take that as like, oh, like I just destroyed my muscle, like I shouldn't train it.
But I went too hard.
Yeah, and And there's actually some evidence saying that, maybe the soreness doesn't actually like mean much towards muscle growth.
Okay.
And that the soreness actually isn't really a good indicator of muscle growth, which is kind of interesting because that's what everyone thinks.
Yeah, if you're not
If you're not
absolutely
sore,
yeah,
yeah,
or like leg day. If you're able to walk upstairs after leg day, you didn't go hard enough. Like
yeah,
that's just
yeah,
bogus.
yeah. And like so basically, there's also a psychological component to all of this too, and we should always keep that in mind. It's not purely biological, and you know,
And
maybe it's a perception of what's going on that's keeping you away from the training, not the actual physiology of you being overtrained.
and that perception also I think stems from your habits, right? Of the eating and the sleeping, etc. If you are a person who knows that they have bad habits, you're psychologically going to be probably predisposed to thinking, oh, just because I'm sore, oh, I'm overtraining it. Oh, I need to cut back a little bit, or I need to go back to my normal way of living. Let's say so.
Yeah.
Okay, can I get a little wrap up of kind of
Sure.
some
So
topics?
always match your volume and intensity. So keep those inversely proportional, but within measures that are decent. So keep your volume at the beginning of your training cycle is quite high, but within a range that keeps you that's a recoverable amount of volume, and then keeping that intensity lower, but still at a relative value that keeps you motivated to go to the gym. You're not just moving stuff around. And then as your training block commences, and then as it goes into finishing stages, you want to increase intensity and drop the volume, because this will allow you to peak for another cycle after a deload week. And then adrenal fatigue is not supported by science. Your adrenals can keep you can withstand 2 years of life. So obviously you're not going to use them for another year because you won't be here. But the point is that maybe it's not the adrenal fatigue. Maybe it's your habits, your sleep, your nutrition, and your water intake, and your past training experience. And then always keep in mind that there's psychological components to all aspects of training and life. So we should keep that perspective while thinking about training as well.
Awesome. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed episode number 11. Please share the show and have a great one.